is Sidney Cohen. I was president of the AGA in 1990-91 when we met in San Francisco. I currently live in Pennsylvania, where I've been for the past 50 years, coming here directly after fellowship. I live in the area known as the Main Line, which is Villanova, Haverford, and areas around there. But my time has been spent in Philadelphia at various institutions.
Could you give us some background on how you got into medicine and also how you chose to work in the field of gastroenterology?
Well, I came into medicine rather indirectly and somewhat by accident. I am the first member of my family to go to college. I was brought up in Hoboken, New Jersey, which was a blue-collar, pretty rough area at the time. Now it's been quite gentrified, but my father was a steel worker. And I had very little role model, except for the uncle of a very good friend of mine who was a primary care physician. And I got to know him. I watched his career develop, and physicians were always high prestige and a very desirable place, especially in Jewish families. So I went to college. I thought I was going to become an engineer, and then I gradually moved towards the biological sciences and was able to secure a place in medical school. In the years after medical school at downstate in New York, I went to Boston as a resident at Boston City Hospital. At that time, medicine was a very collegial world between institutions. Harvard, Boston University, and Tufts, where I trained, interacted on a very friendly basis. They were not competitive, and there were very many prominent gastroenterologists in Boston at the time who were role models. So the main one being Franz Ingelfinger at Boston University, and we used to go to his conferences. He was gracious enough to meet with us, and he was truly, at that time, the role model, the leader in gastroenterology, and everybody wanted to follow in his footsteps. Other notable people were Kurt Isselbacher, James Patterson at Tufts, where I trained, Marshall Kaplan, and many people at the institutions of Harvard, different services, Norm Zamchek. But Kurt Isselbacher and Franz Ingelfinger were the leading figures, and Ingelfinger was the person to follow. So I was able to secure a fellowship, and because of the collegiality in Boston, I trained in the Ingelfinger division with the late Lauren Harris. Lauren was the leading individual in intestinal motility, challenging the norms of the day and challenging the late Charles Code, who was the leader in esophageal motility. And that's how I came into GI, but it was a wonderful experience in Boston at the time. The meetings were open, people met with other fellows, and there was no competitiveness for clinical patients. There was, patients were available, and we were able to work in a very friendly manner. And I liked GI because it was the early era of fiber optic endoscopy. And although many of the leaders at that time did not see the future of fiber optic endoscopy, I believe that I saw it clearly, as did many of the young people in the field at the time. And we embraced that field because of the future potential of doing interventional fiber optic endoscopy in a clinical setting. So that's how I came into GI. That's how I came into medicine. It was somewhat accidental at times, but it's been a great career, and I have no regrets whatsoever for pursuing the pathways.
What motivated you to get involved with AGA and eventually become president?
Well, after fellowship in Boston, uh, I was recruited to go to the University of Pennsylvania uh, under the late Frank Brooks. And Frank was former president of the AGA, and he was a leading gastric and pancreatic physiologist. And Frank became president of the AGA, as all of the chiefs of GI at Penn had. It was before Frank Brooks was T. Greer Miller, who was one of the founding fathers of American gastroenterology. He began the field as a branch of psychiatry at Penn. And then I got to know him. He was well into his 90s, a very inspirational man. And then I met Frank Brooks, who was my mentor, who then became president. And at the time, because I was a young faculty member, I was doing well in my research career, I was at a very good institution, I was appointed to various committees. I became chief of GI at Penn, and then I became chair of committees, the Training and Education Committee, the Publications Committee, and it was an evolutionary process. But at that time, the AGA was clearly the leading organization, as it is today, but it was so dominant. The Liver Society was a small research organization. The Endoscopy Society was just really beginning, and a lot of people were anti-endoscopy. They thought we were becoming too technical. And the ACG was a purely clinical, no research at the time, and it was not a very dominant organization. But the AGA was the dominant organization, and to be on a committee, to have an office of the governing board, and then to become president was really great for me. But it was clearly not many powerful organizations as they are today. It was the AGA, and then everything else was second or tertiary to the AGA. When Frank Brooks was president of the AGA, when I was on the faculty at Penn, I was allowed to run his postgraduate course, and it was quite an experience. And I got involved with more and more of AGA activities. But again, I would stress it was the AGA, and then everything else very secondary to the AGA. It's not like today where there are so many competing organizations of the ACG, the ASGE, the Liver Society. It was one dominant organization.
What do you recollect from your time as president?
Well, clearly the leadership role that I had in American medicine, committees, met many of the leaders, both on a national level, but to some extent on an international level as well. We dictated policies for gastroenterology. We worked with government, but it was a very collegial, warm working relationship. And we all, on the governing board, on the committees, we felt positive about what we were doing. We were doing the right thing for medicine and for our field. And it was an exciting time because we were there during the development of gastroenterology. For the first introduction, the first real drug in gastroenterology, cimetidine, we took part in that, and the AGA was involved in that phase as we moved into real pharmacological advancements. And then we watched the advancements in endoscopic therapy, and then the development of hepatitis B, discovery by Dr. Blumberg from Philadelphia, and then hepatitis B vaccine. We saw Barry Marshall develop H. pylori, describe Helicobacter pylori as a cause of peptic ulcer disease. So it was a very exciting time, and all of the people involved in the AGA, from at the staff level, to the committees, to the governing board, were working together and feeling that we were on the right track and doing the right thing for American medicine, and especially for the field of gastroenterology. The other thing is that because it was a smaller organization, there was some very positive and warm social events. The AGA president had a big dinner party, a ball with tuxedos, and it was just a wonderful, warm friendship. We all knew each other, and it was both social, we were politically involved, and we were involved in medicine. And there was very little, throughout most of my early career, very little competition. So we were working together. I think now the field of medicine has become so much more competitive in terms of research grants, competitive in certain terms of institutional interactions on a local level. So I think that there was a lot less of that. So there was a lot more friendships that could be developed, especially in the area of research. Many grants were funded, far fewer funded now. So we were able to get grants. We were able to deal in a very free way with industry. There was not the restrictions that we currently have, and industry very, very much supported the AGA and our field. They gave generously, they interacted with us. And I think now the restrictions have really limited the flow of resources to the field and to medicine in general.
What kinds of issues were AGA focused on while you were president?
Well, we were trying to interact on a more open basis with the other societies. We tried to have joined together the tripartite group of the ASGE and the ACG, so we can have one giant organization that spoke for the field of gastroenterology politically. And we had meetings to that effect, but we couldn't really bring it out in a way that all of the organizations became one, and we spoke with one voice to organizations like the Board of Internal Medicine, to the politicians, to the senators when we lobbied. We were coming out with different messages, and we wanted it to be one message. And it really never came about. The ACG went its way, the ASG went its way, and the AGA. But I think there's still a collegial relationship, but not one organization speaking with one voice. The other big area in gastroenterology that I got involved with mostly was the foundation. When I was president of the AGA, it was my really signature event. We started in my year with first-time full-time management. David Alpers had a meeting while he was president, and we moved on to full-time management. We had part-time managers through the SLAC organization in New Jersey. They ran many professional societies, and we had a representative from SLAC attend the meetings, and it was a very small-time operation. And David, myself, and Walter Hogan, we had a consultant, and we decided to go to full-time management. David then stepped down as president, and I was left with being the first president to work with a full-time management team. Robert Greenberg was recruited, and it was him and me. The people from SLAC dropped out or certainly lost interest because their company was no longer involved. And I worked from home to a great extent. My wife helped a great deal. She organized the social events. She helped pick the meeting venues. We only had one real full-time person working from home, Greenberg. And we had a very important meeting in Vancouver when we discussed the problems in gastrointestinal research funding, dropping to fewer and fewer people getting funded, especially young investigators. And I came up with the idea that we would have a foundation. The governing board went along with it. Greenberg, working from his home, was an attorney, and he set up the bylaws, and we set up the foundation. That was my major signature event in gastroenterology at the AGA level. So I developed the foundation, and Bob Greenberg and I then went to California to select, help recruit president for the foundation. It was called the Digestive Health and Nutrition Foundation, not the AGA Foundation. And we went to visit the late Martin Brotman, who was at Pacific Medical Center. He had just been made CEO of Pacific Medical Center. He was very skilled in fundraising, working with the Jewish organizations, and he raised a considerable amount of money for the Pacific Medical Center in San Francisco. And Martin had a skill set different than many of us at the AGA governing board. He was a real entrepreneurial leader, a physician leader. He ran a medical center. He ran fundraising. And we met with him, and he accepted the position to be the president of the new AGA Foundation. And it was very interesting because Brotman, being such a smart, perceptive guy, told us that eventually there was going to be a huge conflict between the AGA Foundation, or the Foundation for Digestive Health and Nutrition, and the AGA governing board. And I told him, I said, "Man, that's not going to happen. I won't let it happen." But he was absolutely right. And in future years, a real conflict occurred with the foundation. The foundation had a lot more freedom than the AGA did. We could accept money, we could develop programs, and it was enormously successful. We tried to raise money from grateful patients, less successful. But it was interesting that we were able to start raising money from AGA members. GI was a very successful field financially. We convinced AGA members that they should give something back to their field, and they did. We had the legacy members who gave $25,000, and we were able to recruit a lot of money, but conflicts developed because of the freedom of a foundation versus a professional organization. And then eventually the conflicts grew and grew, and the AGA Foundation was brought into the AGA governing board. And I was still involved with it. I became director or president of the foundation at one point, but it was the right thing to move into the AGA governing board. It still is now very, very successful. It brings in money, with the theme being the support of young investigators. Some of the presidents forgot that and tried to support established investigators, bridge grants. That didn't work out very well, but the theme of supporting young investigators resonated well. It's been a huge success, and that's something that I'm very proud of. And it was great working with Dr. Brotman. Martin was a unique individual. He became a very close friend to the AGA, became my friend personally. We socialized, and he brought so much talent to our organization and so much business sense to the organization. So I'm very proud of that. And that was a big issue in GI. We wanted to support research because of the diminishing research base of to gastroenterology, diminishing at the NIH. At one point, 40–50% of grants were funded. It went down to less than 10%. So funding of research, getting young people started, that was a very primary issue during my presidency. And the other things that we were involved in is we started the lobbying at Congress to bring our messages forth. And I think all of us got involved with going to Congress, meeting with senators, and trying to develop a more personal gastrointestinal presence at the government level, both for funding of clinicians, for research, and for recognition of the field. So it was a very rewarding, very rich period in my life.
Thank you for that. It's an amazing legacy that you've left with the foundation. It's done so much good. You mentioned Dr. Brotman, and I wanted to give you the opportunity to reflect on, Dr. Brotman has passed away, as have some other AGA leaders who aren't available for these oral history interviews. And I wanted to see if there was anyone else or any other reflections you had on those leaders.
Well, this past year, we lost a number of very prominent people, both in my life personally and from the AGA. Martin Brotman was a unique individual. He was a Canadian. He trained at the Mayo Clinic. And many people said to me in a private mode that they always thought that Martin Brotman was the smartest guy ever to come through the Mayo Clinic. I don't know if that's true or not, but there were a lot of smart people. But Martin was unique. He was basically a clinician that got involved nationally. He was chair of the American Board of Internal Medicine when I was on the board, and then I became chair following Martin Brotman. But he was a real leader at that level. And then at the AGA, he became the treasurer, and he clearly had much greater financial knowledge and ability than all of us. And he saw major flaws in how we were being run. He saw major flaws in the problems with our publishing company and was able to bring them out and establish a much better financial program performer with Elsevier and with our publisher. And he saw that we weren't being rewarded financially for the great things that the AGA was doing. And then Martin helped me tremendously and helped the AGA tremendously with the foundation. He got it off the ground. He was the founding president, and he was really a great person. He had a lot of sense. He knew money, he knew management, he knew how to raise money, and he did it in a very dignified, quiet manner. And he was very good socially too. He's a great friend. We had lots of wonderful dinners together and very entertaining dinners. The other person who passed away this year was Tachi Yamada. Dr. Yamada was chair of medicine at University of Michigan, and he became AGA president. Tachi had a unique ability to see things that other people didn't see. He was great in developing our ideas for research. He criticized certain things that the AGA was doing. He was very vocal, very smart, very talented. He went on to head up the Gates Foundation. We had a major role nationally. He came back. He was director of research and had a very prominent role at Glaxo Pharmaceutical, and then headed up Takeda Pharmaceutical in Japan. And he had a very unique perspective. I think at times people found him to be very hypercritical of what we were doing, but it was always in the vein of making us better. So he was a very good friend. I was very surprised to hear that he passed away. He was super good shape, ran when we went to meetings. He always got up early to run. I got to know him quite well. In fact, I tried to recruit Tachi to become a fellow when I was chief of GI at Penn, and he went on to work with Mort Grossman and John Eisenberg at UCLA. The other person that I would have to mention as a past president is John Eisenberg. John was a wonderful person socially, and somebody that I really counted as a great friend. He was a very good investigator. When there were conflicts between myself and the late Mort Grossman, he tried to have them resolved. He brought me out to California to meet with Mort, and he became president of the AGA for 2 years because of one of the past presidents stepped down. And John just was a leader. He led. He was an honest, sincere person. He knew gastroenterology well. He was a good investigator. He was very, very friendly, warm, and I counted him as a close friend. And I was very especially proud when I received the Friedenwald Medal, and I received it from John Eisenberg, and he presented it to me. That was a very special moment in my life. So I think that people like Brotman, Yamada, Eisenberg were extraordinary leaders at the AGA for different reasons, different personalities, but they made the AGA what it is today, a great organization. And I was pleased that I was around to be with these people. I counted them as friends, as colleagues. I worked with them. I knew them well. I knew their families. I knew their spouses. And each one, though, gave something special to the AGA. And each one had a different personality. Each one brought to the AGA a special sense of leadership. And I can just close my eyes and see Mike Brotman making comments. I can see Tachi Yamada being critical of what we were doing, but in a way that made us better. He was very positive in that way. And I could see John Eisenberg leading us in his manner forward to better research, better clinical care, bringing his perspective to the organization. So each of these individuals were a big part of the AGA, and unfortunately, they're not here today to give an oral history about the organization.
Can you share your thoughts on where AGA is today, maybe your hope for our future?
Well, the AGA is the premier GI organization. Every country outside of the United States wants to be the AGA. They want to have their own DDW. So it clearly is the premier organization. It's a dominant organization over the other organizations, which have become quite a bit stronger. The ASGE is very strong. The ACGE has come along. The American College has come along quite well. And the Liver Society, AASLD, has come along quite well. But the AGA remains the dominant organization. The problem is that it's become so big. And GI is beginning to divide up into smaller branches. Like you have hepatology, which was a small research field during my early years. Now it's a prominent part of gastroenterology. The hepatologists want to become separate. They want to be identified separately. They have their own source of revenue with liver transplant, all the new drugs for hepatitis C and B. The endoscopists want to become separate. They consider themselves interventionalists. They don't identify any longer with the more cognitive aspects of gastroenterology, certainly not with liver or with clinical luminal gastroenterology in terms of the cognitive aspects of it. So it's beginning to separate, and as well as the inflammatory bowel people are developing their own identity. They have their own fellowship. So the challenge of the AGA is going to be to keep this very diverse group of individuals together. I'm not sure it can happen. The history of many big organizations is that it reaches some critical size and then explodes and breaks up into smaller pieces. The AGA has been successful in keeping this going. The meeting has become very big. In fact, some people feel too big. But the challenge is going to be to take this diverse group of people, hold them together, working at one field, gastroenterology, hepatology, the interventionalists, the liver people, the ulcerative colitis people, and hold them together in one organization to have a meeting that people can move between the sessions and continue, and to speak with one voice for this very large field. Gastroenterology, hepatology has become the dominant subspecialty in internal medicine, without a question. It has passed cardiology. It has a huge diversity of organ systems, of diseases. Pharmaceutical companies have been very prominent in developing new drugs. There's many, many new procedures that are coming along. So there's a lot happening in the field, and the growth of the field has to be maintained within a structure. And the challenge is going to be whether or not the AGA can be that structure. And it would have to be done with a lot of innovative electronics, with Zoom, like we're doing today, with telemedicine, with computers, and it can be done, but it's going to take a very creative force to do it. One of the things, as a side issue, I continue to practice. So I work a lot with the millennial generation, who are quite a bit more advanced in computers and ideas. And I think it's going to be interesting to see if a lot of those ideas can be incorporated into our profession. For example, telehealth is a great example of that. Zoom is a great example of that. Electronic records, a great example of that. Digital imaging, artificial intelligence. But that's going to be the challenge for the AGA. And I hope that the AGA has the people on board to bring that all together. It's a big challenge. It takes a lot of very interesting individuals to do that. You need a lot of Elon Musks at the level to develop these new ideas for the field.
So is there anything else you would like to share that I didn't already ask you about?
No, the thing that I would share is that being in the AGA and being in a leadership position was truly one of the highlights of my professional career. It was a wonderful experience. I was very blessed to become president of the AGA, to become a Freedom Wall medalist. Well, a phenomenal honor, and one that I will always treasure. And I can just remember so vividly standing at the AGA with my family there, receiving the Freedom Wall medal from John Eisenberg, a close friend. It's just inexplicable how wonderful experience. The AGA has been a home to me, and it's something that I would love to see flourish, and it will flourish. It has great new young leadership. There's a great staff at the AGA, and there's an infrastructure which I was pleased to be part of developing. It has its own foundation, has a lobbying effort. So all of it is there, and I'm very honored to have been a part of the AGA. No question in my mind. I'm honored and pleased to wish the AGA a very, very happy and successful future at its 125th anniversary. Unbelievable, 125 years of excellence and growth and service, both to the field of gastroenterology, but also to medicine and to our country.